Okay.
And the other stories are stories that, when I was in prison, me and a friend began writing true crime because
Oh yeah.
we had this wealth of material. Like a lot of my
Yeah, you got
stories,
unlimited. You got unlimited crime.
unlimited. Yes. And so I had, not just my cartel buddies, who none of them are in our unit because they weren't prior military service, but just amongst the guys in the units. And so, we had a lot of a number of CIA guys, a lot of NSA guys. And so I was able to, I can't tell you how many special forces came through, persuade a number of them. Force Recon guy came back to LA, found out his friend had gotten involved in dealing ecstasy, and, his buddy got ripped off. And so then they go do the collection, and when they go to take back the money, he calls in a couple of his Marine friends. So the 3 Marines go to get the money back, and they stumble upon $2 more million worth of product. So they end up they liberate everything. That was their seed capital. Next thing, just an amazing story about these young Marines that end up causing all kinds of mischief. The recidivism rate had dropped down to 1%.
1%.
1%. McDonnell Douglas looking for these guys because you had 170 men living in the units, a residential-based program. Everybody prior military.
All right, folks, welcome back. We got a banger today. We went and pulled Pierre.
It was in the
You're
prison.
saying, hang on, Pierre. You know, these cats on my channel hate officers. So you're saying a lot of people in prison with you were officers in there for fraud or bank embezzlement?
Most of them were white collar guys, sir. Yes.
White collar guys, yeah.
A lot of the businessmen who fell afoul of. When I say fraud, I'm talking like insider trading. It was rampant, especially before 2008, before the collapse of the financial system. There's a lot of shenanigans going on Wall Street. And so you have a lot of these guys showing up, and because they were prior military service.
When did you get in charge? So you were in prison as a former veteran, really smart dude. When did they put you in charge of the veteran reentry program? Talk about kind of the genesis, because I got a lot of veterans watch this channel, instrumental in the early part of the process.
Well, I transferred, my father passed away, so I wanted to move closer to my mom. I didn't want her to have to travel across the country to come visit me. And so when I landed at that particular prison, you had an administrator who really took reentry serious. And reentry, of course, is preparing the men to return back to society. The Bureau is very good at making sure guys don't escape from prison.
Absolutely. I think it's 11 months.
They have the recidivism rate is 50%, sometimes 60%. Like they fail miserably on that particular metric. Woman that was the executive at the prison, her name was Jody Ward. She said, you know what, she's going to create this program. And she had a lot of family members that were veterans, so it was a personal issue for her. And so she was able to persuade the warden to go along with the pilot program locally at the prison. And so when I arrived, at that point, she was just building the program. Like half the unit was still people with no prior military service at all. Look, I'd already been in the system at that point for 17 years. Like I'd seen most of all the programs were just dog and pony bullshit. And so I told her, look, you can run this nonsense by the new guys, but come on, we both know what's going on here. And she's like, no, like she's serious about building this program. Quite frankly, she put the money out of her own pocket. Like there was no funding. And she's like, look, I need the bodies. I'm putting you in the unit. Once I fill up the unit, if you want to leave, I'll transfer you out. So I said, oh yeah. The fact that she was putting up her own money impacted me. And she spoke my language because she wanted to have, statistically valid samples. And so I saw that she was bringing a more sophisticated level of analysis. So I said, I'll stick around. Well, it just so happened, I'm a Brazilian American of Italian descent. So although I'm welcomed within the Latino Mexican prisoner community, at the higher security levels, Italians and Jews are a separate car. Like we are our own grouping. And so when I arrived at the low security institution, it just so happened that the number one orderly in the unit was a captain for the Gambino crime family. And so he was looking for a new cellie. She saw that in my jacket it says, Italian Jewish car. So she calls him in, and long story short, he ends up I move into the cell with him. He and I end up becoming really good friends. And so he was handling the initial stages of the Veterans Reentry Program. He's the one who persuaded me to stick around. He was, combat veteran, Vietnam guy, Purple Hearts, Bronze Star. You had a lot of men in that program that were Bronze Stars, multiple Purple Heart guys. I mean, from all Vietnam all the way through Iraq and Afghanistan, of course. When he started asking me like, hey, what do you think we should do with respect to providing services? Because she's like, you guys understand what the men need, because a lot of the men had already been through the VA. Like I'd been in prison the entire time, so I'd never had any interactions with the VA.
Okay.
But he's asking me, and I'm thinking at it from a logical perspective. I'm thinking, well, we need to build workshops. What do the men need when they leave prison? They need jobs. So let's focus on developing a program that can allow men to have employment assistance. Men need housing. Like if you can get the guy out of prison and make it the first 3 months, the recidivism rate drops exponentially. But they just need that little bit of help. Well, if they're homeless, like the guys come to prison, they got a 10-year sentence. The wife leaves him. She's married with a new man. He can't go back to that house. And the Bureau is not allowed to transfer a man to a new venue unless he already has a pre-established address or community ties. So there was a lot of guys in the program. An Army buddy out of Nashville wants to give the guy a job, but they won't let him transfer, even if he's got a job. So they're sending him back to Atlanta to go release homeless. Like you're dooming this man to failure.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's like, you know what? We got to... And so I started coming up with these ideas. Ultimately, we built 5 workshops. He actually wasn't taking the credit for it. Like he would go back there and say, hey, my cellie says this. My cellie says that. So finally, she calls me back into the program. She called me back into the office. She's like, hey, I want you to be the coordinator for the program. Like you're coming up with all these ideas, just run it. Because she looked at, my jacket indicates I've got very good organizational skills.
Just say,
so she's like, I need someone like you to run the program. She's like, I'll let Donnie, my cellmate, run the unit. She said, he's the number one. He handles all the orderly related activities. You just make sure the program's up and running. Begin interacting with a lot of the men. You identify, like a lot of the guys show up, they don't need no help. You're going to have some guys that are knuckleheads, whatever. Other guys, they don't need help. But there are literally men that will show up. I'm talking out of 700 men, at least 300 to 400 that were in desperate need of services. Whether it's employment assistance, transitional housing, credit repair and restoration, getting their medical benefits, getting their retirement benefits. Hell, there were guys that served in Vietnam that I was getting their Agent Orange pay. Guys are getting checks, 6-figure checks. I had one guy, he's in his 70s. He's crying. He's like, he's going to be able to pay for his grandkids' college. Guy had 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. He didn't even know he was eligible for any of this. I'm like, what are you doing? You're actually making an impact on people's lives. I mean, so much so that it was funny because at the end of we started out, it was a pilot program for the first 2 years. Then it became a formal program locally at the prison. That ran for 3 years. Then it went to the Bureau adopted the Coleman model and made it available nationwide. Well, during that 5-year period, we had literally dozens of tours because the recidivism rate started dropping and people started buying into the program. So now we got guys coming from DOD, from the VA. We got, we had a tour from CENTCOM. I spent an hour talking to the brass from CENTCOM and they wanted to know what can they do to make this program a success. And so it received a tremendous amount of buy-in. At the conclusion of my 5-year period as the program coordinator, the recidivism rate had dropped down to 1%.
1%.
1%.
Why aren't you working for the Department of or the Bureau of Prisons right now?
The Department, the VA offered me a job.
Okay.
When I that was my release plan was to go to work for the VA. She's like, look, we're snatching you up. You're great. You're just going to reentry services. I get to the halfway house, and they said, because when you're at the halfway house, you're still technically a prisoner.
Okay.
They said, as a prisoner, you can't go to work for the federal government. That's why they wouldn't let me take the job.
Come on, man.
Yes.
So can you not go? Are you still you're not in the halfway house right now, are you?
As of 3 days ago. My release date is technically March 1st.
Okay,
I got
March 1st.
of 25.
So
I got released early because of the First Step Act.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Pierre, because my dad did 4 years in prison. My stepdad did 4 years. My real dad did 19. My uncle did most of his life in prison.
Sure.
And so I give 2 shits. Are you going to work for the VA here shortly? I know the government right now.
I have to get permission to leave the district to go speak with the woman.
What do we got to do that?
It would require me moving. I don't know if they're going to, if the VA, the person that handled the VA services for the prison was in South Florida.
Okay.
I'm in Central. So I'd have to transfer venues. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get permission to do so. I'm going to speak with her once I get permission to travel more than 100 miles. I'm going to go and have lunch with her, sit down and see, hey, is there anything available for me in Central Florida, whether it be in Tampa or in Orlando. That way I don't have to affect the change of venue.
See, and this is what we're talking about, right? Why don't they want you helping? Because you got it down to 1%, right? And we know that prisons in America are a big business. They are a big business. I mean, I think it's 4 times. We got 4 times the number of incarcerated people in our country per capital dollar of anywhere else in the world, So, well, damn, man. I was like, why is this dude not working for them? After I read all the documents you sent me, I said, man. But, once again, we live in America. Dude goes to prison, builds a great program in prison. It helps a ton of people. It does what prison is supposed to do, rehabilitate people, at least on the terms of not letting them go back, right? Giving them some options so they don't end up going back and they're successful. They can lead a successful life. They throw a bunch of hurdles in your way.
Well,
So
that worked very hard in constructing the program. Prior to the C-19 issue, companies were just hiring guys coming right out. And literally, we were getting faxes into the prison. McDonnell Douglas looking for these guys. Because you had 170 men living in the units, a residential-based program. Everybody prior military. And so everybody understood chain of command. Everybody understood pay attention to detail. Everybody understood teamwork. These are qualities that you can pitch to employers. And then you've got the specific skill sets. And
what is C-17, Pierre? Sorry.
C-19?
C-19.
The pandemic.
Okay. C-19 caused a strife and everything, obviously, but it put a hamper on what your program was doing.
No, we were the only program in the Bureau that was continuing the program because we had a residential-based program, so we didn't have to leave to go to education. We didn't have to leave to go to psych services. So they could come to our unit and have, the parenting class or the Money Smart class. And so we ran the 5 workshops because I was able to essentially dispense preferred housing. And so we had the guy that was a Wall Street banker from Merrill Lynch who got a bullshit fraud case, tax case. So he's teaching the credit repair and restoration course.
Yep.
So I was able to identify inmates with those particular skill sets and put them in. We had like 4 Harvard grads teaching classes. We had several judges teaching classes. A lot of the men were officers. And so they came with a high level of education. It was in a
You're
prison.
saying, hang on, Pierre. These cats on my channel hate officers. So you're saying a lot of people in prison with you were officers in there for fraud or bank embezzlement?
Most of them were white collar guys, sir. Yes.
White collar guys, yeah.
A lot of the businessmen who fell afoul of, when I say fraud, I'm talking like insider trading. It was rampant, especially before 2008, before the collapse of the financial system. There's a lot of shenanigans going on Wall Street. And so you have a lot of these guys showing up. And because they were prior military service, we had the one program nationally. So guys were getting sent to the program. And it actually became, because the program had become so successful, defense attorneys were now using it to get guys sentence reduction. Like, you don't need to give him as much time because he's going to go to veterans reentry. So now the DOJ started sending people out there to find out what's going on. Then here comes the BOP director. He was an Army general, retired general. He came, he spent a half hour with me. Next thing you know, we got Marco Rubio's office coming to see us. Like, I can't tell you how many hours with federal judges, probation officers, delegations from DOJ, delegations from the VA. Every one of them, they were very impressed with the services that were provided by the program. It just became an issue when guys were starting to get sentence reductions. The prosecutors don't want to see anything of that nature. And at the conclusion of that 5-year, realistically, let's say it started hitting on all cylinders in 17, and in 22, the Bureau adopted it nationwide. And so at every institution, there's a veterans program. Now, whether they're running it the same way we did, I don't know. But I know that any inmate with prior U.S. military service has access to services that can assist with his transition back into society. And, there are so many times where, like I said, the guy from Atlanta, he didn't want to get released homeless. I was able to contact my VA contact, get him transitional housing in Nashville, because his Army buddy was going to get him a job.
Got you.
So now the VA person in Miami contacts the VA person in Nashville, says, "Hey, we need transitional housing for a vet." So I do all the paperwork, and then I take it to the actual director. She confirms all the information because I couldn't send emails to, government offices. So she would confirm the information, boom, then we would effect the change of venue. Like, we'd get letters a year later, year and a half later, guys like, "Man, you guys saved my life. Like, I got a new girlfriend, we're buying a house, I'm getting married, just bought a new car, we owe you everything." Like,
man, Pierre, that's why I do what I do, man.
Amazing, actually.
I just had 2 of my young kids, right? They're grown men, but 2 of my young dudes graduated from flight school, got their wings on Friday. I took all 3 of my kids, right?
Congratulations.
We got an F-18 pilot and an F-35 pilot. So the first F-35 pilot that we've had had a couple jet dudes, but it's like, man, that's why you do what you do, right? Like, when you get those letters, like, it just empowers you to do more. Like, I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more today. I'm going to do more tomorrow. I'm going to help more people. So
I went into it very jaundiced, and after about a year, I'm like, no, these people are serious. Because, most of the time, like I said, it's dog and pony. And then we got our new warden, Kathy Lane, and she essentially staked her reputation professionally on this program. Between Miss Lane and Miss Ward, it was shocking how much the resources that they put into it. Like, they genuinely wanted to see the men not return.
Fire, man. Fire.
And it was just, and like I said, and for the first few years, there was absolutely no funding whatsoever. And it got to the point where other programs were trying to undermine it because they're saying, how are these guys getting, single digit recidivism rates, and you guys are getting funded tens of millions of dollars a year for these programs, and you guys got 50, 60%. You know, because see, we didn't come in with, it wasn't rehabilitation, quite frankly. It wasn't faith-based. It was practical. Men need to get their credit repaired. They need a job. They need a roof over their head. If they can make it 3 months after release, nobody wants to live at the transitional housing. It's essentially like being back in boot camp. It's bunk beds, open bay living. However, it's a roof and it'll allow me to make the transfer. And so those little steps are the difference between dooming somebody, because now he's going to be broke, no money, homeless in a city when he gets released. And what's he going to do? He's going to knock off a liquor store.
Absolutely. He gonna go to what he knows, man.
He's going to do whatever he's going to do, and he's going to end up back in prison. And this time he's going to get a 15 or a 20 piece.
Yeah.
Whereas for just a very small amount of, look, I had all the time in the world, so I didn't get compensated. Like I made no money for this. But amount of resources it took is just a fraction of what it would cost to house this man in prison for 1 year, much less 20 more years.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of conversations I would have either with the judges or with the DOJ officials. I spent literally 45 minutes with Marco Rubio's chief of staff. Like, she's like, this is absolutely amazing. I can't believe what you guys are doing. No, because we actually had the numbers. And the guys that came back were essentially, it was only one guy with new criminal conduct. Like, one of the jackasses had a drunk driving. Another guy got knocked off because he was in the company of a lady of the night, and he had a gram of coke with him. So they get pulled over, and she says, it's his. So now he comes back on the violation. One guy thought he was going to ask his probation officer out to dinner. He's like, is there something going on between us? So, of course, she locks him right back up. And so it was like literally idiotic infractions. And so out of 700 men in a 6-year period, it was literally one new criminal case.
Yeah.
And so
which they hate to see. Like I tell people, I'm doing the same thing in a couple different environments across the government, and they hate it because I have no resources, but I got unlimited success, and they don't like it. Right? Like you said, you had a bunch of people trying to undermine you. They don't like how well you're doing. They don't like that you don't have any resources, because God help them if you give them some resources. Yeah. So shoot, Pierre, how are you doing now? I know you're working at the Big Blue. You're kind of back on your feet somewhat.
Well, yes. I'm fortunate in that I've always had family support throughout the course of my entire bid, and I'm an author and I create content for podcasters. And so I've had several, like one, while I was in prison, I couldn't enter into contracts. But upon me getting transferred to home confinement and completing the home confinement section, boom, I already had 2 contracts. So now there's 3 documentaries being produced.
Okay.
I'm hoping to get permission to start traveling so I can go to LA and film the sizzle reels.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to tell you, man, is it Giselle? Is that the movie out about Giselle? I think it's called Giselle, the TV special about the woman from Colombia that was trafficking.
The Colombian honey, Sofia Vergara, and she's representing a Cuban trafficker out of Miami.
Yeah. Okay. So I had the whole story wrong. Fuck, whatever. All right. But I mean, shoot, they're going to make Breaking Bad about Pierre. I'm looking forward to seeing this, man. It's... Well,
the stories, there's a documentary about my case that is in pre-production right now.
Okay.
And the other stories are stories that, when I was in prison, me and a friend began writing true crime. Cause we had this wealth of material. Like a lot of my
you got unlimited crime.
Unlimited, yes. And so I had, not just my cartel buddies, who none of them are in our unit because they weren't prior military service, but just amongst the guys in the units. And so, we had a number of CIA guys, a lot of NSA guys. And so I was able to, I can't tell you how many special forces came through, persuade a number of them. Force Recon guy came back to LA, found out his friend had gotten involved in dealing ecstasy, and, his buddy got ripped off. And so then they go do the collection, and when they go to take back the money, he calls in a couple of his Marine friends. So the 3 Marines go to get the money back, and they stumble upon $2 more million worth of product. So they end up they liberate everything. That was their seed capital. Next thing is just an amazing story about these young Marines that end up causing all kinds of mischief.
All right, here's the big
Army Ranger who's all kinds of mischief. I mean, he's at the very top, dealing with the cartel guys in Guadalajara, picking up 2 tons of meth at a time. And so we just have, because what I've been told is the people are impacted on the level of detail. Because I understand the cartel operation. Like, I don't put people's business out there, but I'm able to say, look, this is how it was being moved, because it's coming from LA and they're buying cars at the auto auction and they're shipping it to Atlanta because on that end, the logistical hub owns a car dealership. And so the truck driver doesn't even know he's hauling cars with hidden compartments in it, and they're transferring the product into hidden compartments. And so when you're able to tell like those level of details, we call it the American Narco series, where it's focusing primarily on American traffickers who are operating at cartel level operations. And so
do you owe any restitution? So like you're going to have to pay off the restitution before you start seeing money? Or
they just take a percentage of it.
Because that's the other thing. Like cats come out and they can't make no money because they owe all their money to the government or to somebody else in restitution.
They take a percentage of it. It'll be a sliding scale, like 10%, 20%, depending. And now, of course, if the film rights have been optioned, if they buy the film rights, let's say it's $600,000, well then they're coming and taking it. Like they'll take both sums of.
Hey, let me tell you something, Pierre. You're a really smart dude. I'm not too worried about that one.
Yeah, I'm
not too worried about that. Yeah. Being a businessman myself, I know I can squirrel away a couple pennies here and there for a rainy day in the future. So, man, that's a banger right there, brother. Different than everything else everybody's been talking about. I love the VA stuff, man. I'm over here, wheels are spinning. I don't have a large contingency in the VA, but I'm thinking I got some stuff going on, man. I might need a whole crew of aircraft mechanics. And if we can go get them from prison and help some cats, that might be the best thing in the world, man.
Yes. I mean, literally, employers were sending in requests for guys with this particular skill sets. And, we were literally lining up jobs for guys coming out of prison. They land at the halfway house on Monday. They start working on Thursday.
Let's go.
And to the extent anybody in your audience wants to participate in veterans reentry type programs, contact the VA. Let them know, hey, there are men that need these type of... the woman I worked with was phenomenal, but I had developed a rapport with her. And so hopefully they're able to continue that. But, sometimes a little bit of pressure, because there are a lot of guys who, we all made mistakes, but I can't tell you how many guys are in there with Bronze Stars, how many guys are in there with Purple Hearts, and how many highly decorated combat veterans came through that program in the 7 years I was present.